This is the Vic Feazell Show podcast, brought to you by Moroso Wood-Fired Pizzeria and Pinewood Roasters and Coffee Bar. This is Vic Feazell, and I'm here with my fabulous co-host and wonderful musician, Jonathan Zimick. We are happy to be recording again. We're putting these out every Tuesday and Thursday, so look at your podcast app. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, you'll have a new episode each time. We've been getting a lot of good feedback. We have listeners now in France, New Zealand, Australia, Singapore, Mexico, the United Kingdom, the United States, and even Waco. So, hey, we're doing good. Matter of fact, we're doing so well that Jonathan Zimick, my co-host and fabulous musician, is moving to Waco. He's following what I did 3 years ago, exiting Austin and moving up to Waco to become part of Waco, folks. So welcome Jonathan Zimick to the city of Waco. We're going to love having him here. We're happy to have as our guest today Michael Jarrett. We started this interview at the place of one of our sponsors, Moroso Wood-Fired Pizzeria. We interviewed Michael over there in their back room so we could have just a little privacy and a little quiet. And if you ever need a good event room, a good place for a dinner, that room is available. Talk to Dan Moroso about it. He'll give you a private party, and they are good. We had our Christmas party there. So talk to Dan. But anyway, we interviewed Michael Jarrett over there, and really had a good time. Had a good meal, too. So now, and then we came back to the office and talked some more. Check us out on YouTube. We're going to have some video and some photographs. We even got some funny video that we took of Dan Moroso clowning around with us. Dan's a character, and we just love him. We're going to have Dan over one day to do some voiceovers for us. He has I tell him he has a face for radio, but he really has the voice for radio. He's really good. And so Dan's going to come over and do some voiceover promos for us. And hopefully we might have a live event over at Moroso in the near future, and a live event over at Pinewood. And one of the owners at Pinewood, Dylan Washington, is releasing an album, and they're going to be having a release party 24th of October, 8 in the evening, Pinewood Coffee Roasters on Austin Avenue in Waco, Texas. Come pick up an album. Dylan will sign it for you, and it'll be a good time. Come on out. So now we're going to talk with Michael Jarrett about the Rita Salazar case. I'm so excited to have Michael Jarrett here today. Michael Jarrett is one of my heroes. We're going to get into this later, and I'll tell you why, but mainly because of this case, Rita Salazar. And we've been talking about Rita for the last 4 episodes, and now we're going to talk about it some more with Michael. Or have we done 3 episodes?
It's 4.
4. 4 episodes, so this will be number 5 with Michael.
Yes.
So good. Michael Jarrett. Also the Ed Graff case, and I want to have you back to talk about Ed Graff.
Sounds good.
Because we're going to run out of time talking about Rita Salazar and Henry Lucas. So, Michael was the first assistant DA in Waco. He had been an assistant DA in Williamson County in Georgetown, working down there, and by fate became involved in the Rita Salazar case. First, Michael, give me a little bit of your background.
Well, first off, thanks for having me, Vic. I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you today about this case. It's one of those ones that I'll always remember, and there'll always be a special place in my heart and probably a big piece of my head, how this case came about and how we worked through it to get it done. I'm a board-certified criminal attorney in the state of Texas.
That's good.
I was a prosecutor for about 17 years.
Now, board certified, that's hard to get. You got to take a lot of classes and take a pretty daunting test.
It was a tough test.
Yeah.
You know, I finished taking the bar in 2001, and I thought I'd never take any more tests. And 2009, I took another test, and I got board certified.
That's good.
So, yeah, I was a prosecutor I started in Dallas County when I graduated from law school for about 7 years. Then I was a prosecutor in Williamson County for about 3 years. And I finished my prosecution career here in Waco as a first assistant district attorney in McLennan County.
Okay. Man, I appreciate you being here today. I know that you've got a busy job that keeps you busy. I appreciate you. I appreciate your employer for giving you a couple hours off this afternoon. Tell me about when the Rita Salazar case first came across your radar.
So I was a felony prosecutor in Williamson County, Georgetown, and the district attorney at the time was John Bradley. He called me into his office and he said, I need to talk to you about a case, see if you're interested in working on it. And I met with John. The sheriff at the time was James Wilson. I met with the local Texas Ranger was a gentleman by the name of Matt Lindeman. And the lead detective working for the sheriff's department was Larry Hawkins. We had a cold case murder from the 1970s involving Frank Key and Rita Salazar. We had what's called a CODIS hit in Texas, which Texas maintains a DNA database of unsolved DNA samples from crime scenes. Fortunately, in this case, as you well know, the investigators and detectives that worked in the 70s on this case had maintained the undergarments of Rita Salazar
for nearly 40 years.
Yeah, at that time it was 30 plus years.
30 plus. That's incredible. That's just incredible. I'm so impressed they did that.
It really was, and it turned out to be the key to the case, yes. Obviously. So that in 1978, there wasn't DNA. There was DNA, but nobody knew how to utilize it. It wasn't used as a forensic tool. It wasn't used in criminal matters at all until probably the 90s is when the DNA became usable in a court of law.
That's true. I presented Henry Lucas for the very first blood draw for DNA in the early 90s on a murder case up in Tyler. And it's that Lucas blood draw that all the comparisons have been done with.
Yeah, and back then the DNA wasn't nearly as accurate as it is today.
No, not at all. It's gotten so much better.
Yeah. So in this case, we had a DNA hit. In Texas, the law changed in either the late 90s or the early 2000s, where it went from having only people that were convicted of rape or murder that were submitting DNA samples to the database to all offenders that were sentenced to time in the Texas penitentiary. And we really just got lucky, because what happened was an individual who was convicted of a probation violation on a DWI felony case up in Dallas County submitted his DNA, and lo and behold, we got a hit.
Okay, let's back up. So this guy's DNA wasn't in CODIS because of a murder or because of a rape or anything like that. You're saying because of a third offense DWI.
Third offense DWI, this guy was arrested for driving drunk. He was placed on probation, and just because of a probation violation, he was sentenced to, I believe, a minimum sentence in the penitentiary. And because of that law change, his DNA was sampled and periodically tested against the unknown samples involving major crimes, and lo and behold, we got a hit. It happens very rarely, but that's why we have the database.
There's got to be thousands of samples in that database, so I take it it's probably computerized by now.
That's my understanding.
Yeah, that's neat, because it used to take forever, and now they're getting them a lot faster.
Right. So what had happened was we got this hit. Now in Texas, that's not probable cause to make an arrest. It just says that there may be a DNA match out there. In order for us to use that at trial or to develop our case to even get an arrest warrant, we would have to find this person. We'd have to get, either by consent or by warrant, a DNA sample from him where we could get a confirmatory analysis done on his known sample.
And so there was this hit on CODIS, and Who did it hit on? What was the guy's name?
His name was Benny Tiarina Jr.
That doesn't sound anything like Henry Lee Lucas, does it?
It was 100% not Henry Lee Lucas. It wasn't Otis Toole.
And I am so pleased. I'm telling you, I still remember the night I got the call from the reporter with Channel 25 here in Waco. Would you like to comment on this case? And I go, what? What are you talking about? I hadn't heard anything about this because I didn't know anything was going on. He said, yeah, the Rita Salazar case has been solved. I said, what? How? You know, I questioned him more than he did me, and that's when I started hearing about you and your involvement in it. And I was just like, wow, after 30-something years for that to come full circle like that. It was just, I was going to say it made my day, but it made my decade. It really did.
It was really interesting. You know, we talked about it earlier, but when we got the case, the ranger and the detective and I, we kind of formed our little 3-man team. One of the first things we did was go meet with the families. You know, I was a prosecutor for a long time, and you know, these families needed some closure. They needed some understanding of what was happening. We certainly didn't want them to hear about it like you did. Didn't want to hear about it on the news that Rita's case had been solved. So
right. The families, yeah, for sure.
So the first contact we made was with Rita's mother. Lo and behold, she still lived at the same house right near the courthouse in Georgetown. The three of us went and spoke with her. Had a nice long conversation. And we broke the news to her very slowly that we believe that somebody other than Lucas was involved and responsible for her daughter's death.
So she didn't know till then why you guys were there?
No, we didn't tell her. We just said we needed to have a meeting with her.
Wow.
And we sat there in her living room and told her that we think we have some new evidence in the case.
Tell us about that. What did she say? What'd she do?
You know, I think she was more shocked than anything else. I think it was hard to kind of grasp what we were telling her, that after all these years, we may be there where we might have some closure.
Was there anybody else there with her?
I don't really recall. I know her, the mother was certainly there. I believe another relative may have been there as well.
Because there was a sister that was really involved. I remember her. The TV documentary that's going to be coming out in December, they interviewed her.
Yeah, there were other family members that we spoke with during the course of our investigation and ultimately at the plea. But I don't remember there being anybody else there the first time when we spoke with them.
How did they take it? How did she take it when you told her that?
I think she was a little bit skeptical, to be honest with you. She'd been told for so many years that this was done by this mass murderer that it didn't really make any sense. That we're talking about somebody totally unrelated to that case may have been involved in the homicide.
Right. They've been told since 1978, well, 79, that it was Henry Lee Lucas.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Lucas and Toole.
Right.
Kind of a disagreement on who shot whom. You know, I understand that Toole was indicted in Williamson County for Frank Key's murder. Do you know anything about that?
Don't know anything about that. One of the things we did was dig up as much of the old files as we could. As you can imagine, after 30 years, a lot of stuff we didn't have everything. Let's just say that.
Well, I know he was indicted, but I couldn't find anything that he ever actually pled.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any conviction on that case at all.
Yeah.
We then met with the Key family as well. We met with Kevin Key's sister, and we spoke with her. She still lives in the Austin area, and I know that they were elated that we were continuing this case. Interestingly, Frank Kevin Key, they called him Kevin, his brother, I think he always took it very hard.
Stephen.
Yeah, because Stephen is the one who loaned Frank the car that night.
Yeah. And
I think he always had a very personal feeling like if he'd have just put extra gas in the car that night, it wouldn't have happened. And I remember feeling really bad about that hopefully we could bring him some closure too.
He felt real bad about that. He told his brother that gas tank was nearly empty.
He did. He said, you got to put some gas in the car.
And he said, I don't know if I got enough money. And that's when Rita said, don't worry, I have plenty of money. She had $20-something on her. She was going to buy the gas.
Right.
But apparently they never bought the gas.
I know they went to the movies down in Round Rock, I believe, and they never made it home that night.
Never made it home.
Yep.
It's so sad that these sweet young people, just by a simple little mistake of running out of gas, can become victims of a violent criminal predator, just roaming around looking for somebody to snuff out. It's just a really, really sad case.
You know, it is. It's we hear it today that our world has changed so much, and there's violence today, but there was violence 40 years ago. There was senseless violence then too.
For real. I think we just know more about it today. We got the 24-hour news cycles. Everybody has video and pictures on their phone. You know, you hear more about it, but it's always been there.
Yeah.
I mean, they had a task force in the 70s and 80s to try to address all the bodies that were being dumped along I-35.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it was the I-35 task force, and Boutwell was involved in it. That's what got him involved with Sheriff Conway up in Montague with Lucas, thinking that, well, maybe Lucas did orange socks. And that was the first one that Boutwell questioned Henry on.
Yeah.
And then started questioning him about Rita after that. We're trying to be fair. We really are, and put everything in context.
Sure.
Things change. Techniques change. Law enforcement techniques change. So we try to put what Sheriff Boutwell and some of those guys did in the context of the time. And I worked during that time.
I was 2 years old at the time.
I was taking confessions back then and reading confessions. So yeah, the whole technique has changed. You know,
Sure.
because there was a time when it was considered good police work to beat a confession out of somebody. Well, that's just not the way it's done anymore.
I think any police officer or prosecutor would 100% disagree with violence against a suspect.
We would today,
Absolutely.
for sure, because
Absolutely.
our culture has changed and things are more transparent. And I really believe, and I'm optimistic, I believe we're evolving. Our consciousness is evolving. Now, you wouldn't believe that by watching the 24-hour news cycle.
Or the Kardashians.
Yeah, or the Kardashians.
It's the third time that's been brought up today, the Kardashians.
But I do believe that there's a movement forward in consciousness, and hopefully the ones that are getting there will help bring the others along. I want to be optimistic about that.
I think in police work, there's definitely an understanding that we have to get the right person. There's no excuse, and there's no room for wrongful convictions these days. It's important. It's tantamount that we ensure that the truth is what we're always looking for. We're not looking for the conviction. We're looking to find the right person to make sure the right person is held accountable for the crime. It's not about closing cases anymore. It's not about locking down a conviction. It's about doing the right thing.
I love that. And I think we've really moved a long way in the right direction when it comes to that. I really do.
I think we have.
Yeah. There's so much more transparency now, so that helps. The video cameras, that helps because it's harder to lie. You know, there is no privacy anymore, so we better behave ourselves.
I agree with you. You know, I remember when these body mics and the body cams came out for police officers, that there was a pushback saying, well, this is, you know, an invasion of privacy. But in reality, it's a protection for the police officers too. You know, I guarantee you the complaints have come down of police officers acting inappropriately with suspects because, hey, the proof is in the video.
The proof is there.
You can't say that an officer did something when you pull up the video and it's just not there.
Yes.
Now, on the other hand, it holds the officer accountable if something bad goes on.
That's true.
And I think we all have to be a little more careful.
We do.
Show a little more respect to everyone else around us.
That's a good thing. There's a old district judge. He's dead now. But he used to say to me, he said, you know, an armed society is a polite society, because he was from the old West.
I have to agree with that.
But now we're armed with video. And I
Good point.
think that's great. And I think a society armed with video hopefully will be a more polite society. You're going to have those outliers that lick the ice cream and and commit crimes on video.
Blue belt.
But yeah, but for the most part, yeah, I think we're doing better. So tell me some more about your meeting with the suspect after this CODIS hit. I'm calling him suspect, the killer.
So we wanted to be very careful. I really had a great opportunity to work directly with those law enforcement agencies, and specifically Matt and Larry. We didn't want to rush into it. This case had been there for 32 years at the time. And the last thing we wanted to do was rush to make an arrest and not have enough evidence to get a conviction.
Right.
We knew we only had one shot at this thing.
Right.
Because, if we messed it up, it was going to go cold again, and it's going to go away. A lot of people think that DNA is the be-all, end-all, and that DNA evidence proves a homicide or it proves a sexual assault. The reality is that DNA can just show that somebody was there. It doesn't show the act. It doesn't show what actions were taken while that person was there. It shows that they were present at the time. Heck, it only shows that somebody was there at or near Rita Salazar at some time, either before or after she died.
Right.
So it doesn't tell you to lock down he committed a crime.
It's really good evidence, but like you said, it's not the end all be all.
Sure.
I mean, there's a lawyer out of Houston who could tell a good story about that. I don't know if you remember this story, but when they had the train bombing in Spain.
Oh, yeah.
And his DNA showed up amongst some of the blown up stuff on that train, and he had never been to Spain. He had never been on that plane. He had nothing to do with it. Next thing he knows, the FBI is at his door, and it took them forever to get that worked out, that he had nothing to do with it, no how, but somehow his DNA got over there. So it's a very good tool, but like you said, it's not 1,000%.
So we spent actually several months working on our case before we even decided to make contact with our suspect. We monitored what he was doing. We made sure that there wasn't any ongoing criminal activity. We did a deep background check in the guy. He had a lot of minor crimes that he'd committed throughout his life. Usually, like I said, DWI, but also some other minor things. He was wanted at one point for a aggravated assault, but he was never convicted of it. So we thought we had the right guy, but he really didn't fit the profile, to be honest with you. This wasn't a serial killer that we were looking at. We kept building our case. We kept looking up evidence. We talked with everyone that we could talk to. The three of us came up to we literally drove the scene from where Kevin's body was. We walked the scene where Kevin's body was, and we went up to where Rita was found. In fact, there was a neighbor that lived across the highway who still lived in that house 30 years later. And she told us similarly the same story that she told the police at the time. I believe her name was Mrs. White, that she had seen a vehicle out there, saw the lights. The service station that was there in 78 is...
Heard the shots.
Yeah, it heard the shots. But the service station that was there then is just a concrete flat right now. There's nothing there. But we walked it. I remember it feeling very eerie, knowing that this was where a homicide occurred. We came up and met with the sheriff's department in McLennan County.
And Larry Lynch was the sheriff then.
Larry Lynch was the sheriff. He was very helpful to us. He let us sit down. I remember we looked through whatever files they had.
Larry was a good sheriff. I like Larry. And he was the coolest head of all during the Davidian thing.
Yeah, I always liked working with Larry. He retired about 2 years into my tenure as the first assistant here in Waco. But
now,
I always liked working with him.
I liked Larry, but I loved Jack Harwell.
Never got to meet him.
If you had met Jack, you would have loved Jack. Everybody loved Jack.
I know Andy well, and Andy's a good guy.
Andy's a good guy too. Yeah.
So, after meeting with the sheriff's office here in Waco, spoke with the district attorney's office. They didn't get involved in our investigation.
Now, who was the DA then?
John Segrist was the district attorney at the time. So we went back, we evaluated what we had, and we made a decision to attempt to contact Benny Tiarina in the Dallas area. The three of us again, Matt Lindeman, Larry Hawkins, and myself, traveled to Dallas. I remember we were in Matt's vehicle. We didn't know what to expect. Knocked on the door. I was waiting in the car, and they made contact with Benny's mother. She stated that she didn't know where he was, but she would give him our information and hope that he would contact us soon. These are three guys from the Austin area. We didn't know what to do. We ended up at an Applebee's or Chili's, I don't recall which, and we were just about to finish our night feeling like we'd failed, and we're going to head back and try it again another day, and lo and behold, we get a telephone call from a guy identifying himself as Benny Tiarina.
Wow.
We quickly gathered, and we spoke with the local police department. They gave us access to their department. By now, the sun's gone down. It's nighttime. And we had access to a police department interview room. Both the ranger and the detective met with Benny in the interview room, and I sat in the sergeant's office and watched the interview on closed-circuit TV. And
you guys had been vested in bulletproof vests all day, right?
Well, we were vested when we went to the house. We'd probably taken off the vest when
you got to Applebee's.
When we got to Applebee's.
That's a good idea. They're no fun to eat in.
Yeah. So we were at the police station, and Mr. Tiarina just showed up. I remember he got dropped off by somebody, and he couldn't be happier. You know, what are you guys here for? I'm happy to talk with you. I think he was interested, but didn't quite know why we were there. Benny got to talking with our guys, and they built rapport with him. Asked him about his life. He stated he lived in Dallas his whole life. There was some discussion if he'd ever been to Austin, and for a long time he denied ever. I didn't go to Austin. I don't know anything about that. And after a while, I mean, this interview's going on for 30 minutes. Now we're an hour. The discussion's going on, and Larry, I remember as I'm watching it on the computer screen, confronts him with the DNA evidence and says, "Look, this is why we're here."
Wow.
I remember watching it, and his eyes got as big as saucers.
Wow. I would love to see that.
He may not have been a scientist, and he may not have understood everything about DNA, but you could tell he knew something was up, and you could tell that the wheels started turning in his little brain. Strange thing about Benny, he had some sort of skin condition, and he was itching himself the whole time. It was very, very odd, very distracting. But boy, he started itching a little bit more when that DNA evidence got presented to him. It went on for a while, and Matt and Larry are two very, very good interviewers. I've worked with a lot of detectives in my career, and these guys are two of the best. They used a very good technique, which is, the truth will set you free. And, we know you've been keeping this in your whole life for 30 years. Imagine what relief it'll be if you just, tell us what happened. At some point, I think I saw some calm come over Benny. And he started to let bit by bit of the truth come out. He changed his story. He admitted that he'd been to Austin in the 70s.
Okay.
He claimed he'd gone down to Austin to party. You don't know anything about that, do you, Vic?
No, not me.
He claimed he'd been down to Austin to go out on 6th Street and have a good time, listen to music. And he claimed he'd been with two brothers. I can't recall their names, but he claimed that there were two brothers that were with him. And he claimed that on the way back, after a night of drinking and partying, that they were headed back to Dallas. And that's when they found two hitchhikers on the side of the road. I remember him telling a story about them trying to help the hitchhikers, and our guys doing a good job of explaining to him that we know that's not what happened. We know that Kevin was left for dead,
right,
in Williamson County, and that Rita was taken in the car with him. Eventually, after quite some time, he admitted that he knew that Kevin left the car at some point. I can't remember the exact details, but he says that he didn't leave the car. He always had an excuse for himself, that these two unknown people took Kevin out into that field, and he doesn't remember hearing gunshots, but he knew one of them might have had a gun, that type of thing.
Yeah. That's called the some other dude done it defense.
Basically.
You've heard that
it wasn't me.
1,000 times.
Yeah. It was the other guy. It wasn't me.
Yeah.
And then he told a story about how Rita came back in the car, and I remember him saying that she wanted to be there, which just doesn't make any sense.
No.
Her boyfriend, the boy that she just had gone on this date with, didn't get back in the car.
Right.
And she wanted to be there.
Right.
And he told a story how one of his two friends, or both of the two friends, were fooling around. One of the two friends was fooling around with her in the backseat of the car, and he was in the front passenger seat. Now, as his story got going, I think he understood to some extent that he was going to have to explain how his DNA got on Rita's underwear.
So that's what I had heard, was that the DNA was a sample taken from Rita's underwear that had been preserved from a rape kit.
It was. And I think at that point, Benny probably figured he was in bad shape. And he told the story that while this other person, this unknown individual, was fooling around with Rita in the back seat. Now, Benny says it was consensual, that they were voluntarily making out in the back seat after her boyfriend was killed. Mm-hmm. It just didn't make any sense.
No. Mm-hmm.
And then he tells a story that makes even less sense. Benny told our detectives that he just couldn't help himself. That as he was in the front seat and watching this friend of his mess with Rita Salazar, that he got turned on and masturbated. And his only idea of how his seminal fluid got into Rita's underwear was that he must have masturbated and it somehow projectiled over the seat and must have landed on her.
Ricochet.
Well, I couldn't make that up, Vic. I really couldn't. This is the story this man told. And I'll tell you what, I credit.
It's so ridiculous, but it's so sad, you know?
It is. And I remember speaking with Detective Hawkins and Ranger Lindeman that night and saying, I think we've got enough. I think him putting himself at the scene, I think having the DNA inside of her underwear is enough for me.
I would agree.
And to be honest, I'll credit Mr. Bradley, the DA, for being even more cautious, because I called John that night and I said, John, I think we got enough. Let's get this to the grand jury. Let's get an indictment. Let's get this guy off the streets. And John said, don't rush. Let's make sure we got the right guy. And so we worked another couple of months, dotting all of our I's, crossing all of our T's, getting in fact, Benny gave us a DNA sample that night. He voluntarily gave us a DNA sample.
That's good.
John wanted to make sure that we had a confirmatory analysis done on the DNA.
Good.
Which, in hindsight, it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
No one's going to argue with that after the fact. We're going to close out any of his, appellate attacks if we get everything done the right way the first time. And that was our goal. And that's what we did. We got the confirmation from DPS that, in fact, Benny Tiarina was, in fact, the same person whose DNA was on the inside of Rita Salazar's underwear. And we convened a grand jury. The three of us presented the case to the grand jury, and we had a unanimous indictment handed down.
Grand jury in Williamson County.
Williamson County.
Now, is this an indictment on Frank or on Rita, or on both?
I believe we had two capital murder charges.
Okay.
So, on both.
Good.
All this time, things are going on in politics that I'm totally unaware of. I'm living in Williamson County, and now my friend Abel Reyna was elected district attorney in McLennan County. I had a conversation with Abel, and he asked me to be the first assistant district attorney and come to Waco.
So you had known Abel from before?
I didn't know Abel. No,
Abel.
I was recommended by a prosecutor in the McLennan County DA's office to Abel.
Okay.
And he contacted me. He wanted to have somebody with outside perspective that had been a prosecutor for their whole career come and help lead a new office, a new administration.
So he was just getting started.
Yeah, he was just getting started. This is like November 2010.
Okay.
Right after he got elected.
All right.
And so, we had a discussion. I remember one of the first things I talked to him about was, hey, I've got this cold case, and I don't have any cooperation in McLennan County. If I come up there with you, will you let me prosecute this case in McLennan County too? And he said yes. He said, absolutely, we're going to do the right thing. And if that's the right thing to do, let's work on it together. Let's bring it up here.
You know, I'm grinning from ear to ear right now. I mean, I just love this.
And frankly, Vic, I was naive to the backstory. I was prosecuting this case as a cold case based on the evidence that I had in front of me. And truly, it's probably better that it was that way.
Right.
That I wasn't focused on everything that had happened in Waco or McLennan County, or with what had happened with you and the district attorney's office in the 70s and the early 80s. I was working on this case just to find the truth.
That is so neat.
So
Is this so neat the way it worked out?
yeah. So in January 2011, I started as first assistant district attorney in McLennan County in Waco. And I had an agreement with John Bradley in Williamson County, and he told me I could stay involved in the case down there. I wasn't the special prosecutor on it, but I would be able to continue to work with him on the case, and we would work together to get a resolution on the files. So when I moved up here,
That's good.
in fact, that's the first time I talked to you, I think.
Yeah.
When I got an indictment in McLennan County on Benny T. Arena
Yes.
for the homicide of Rita Salazar.
Oh, man. Made my heart dance.
So I remember talking to the families again, saying, we've got it. We're going to get an indictment, and I'm going to go to Waco, and I'm going to get another indictment.
So did he have to come to Waco and plead in Waco?
We brought him from McLennan or Williamson County to Waco. In the end, he entered a guilty plea. Russ Hunt Jr. represented him both in Waco and McLennan County.
Okay.
And I worked with John Bradley, and we agreed to run the sentences concurrently. But he accepted a 40-year, I believe, plea bargain
Okay.
on each case. I was there for the sentencing in Waco, and I was there for the sentencing in Williamson County as well. I went down there again with Larry and Matt, and we were there for the sentencing in both counties.
Fabulous. And for our listeners, the 40 years he got, that equals a life sentence for that man.
We're hopeful. I
Yeah.
really think he will be. I know that
I'd have to live a long time.
if he comes up for parole, I'll be protesting it.
Yeah, me too.
Question for you, Michael. Did he ever at any point fully admit what happened that night, or was his theory the last thing he said about it?
You know, Larry did a good job, and Larry continued to follow up with him. I think Hawkins had a couple of interviews with him. He continued to say that he was not the main shooter, but he admitted that he was a party to the crime. You know, Texas law says, and Vic, you know the law, if you either aid, abet, assist, encourage someone to commit a crime, you can be held equally culpable for the crime. And he finally admitted to that. I don't know if we'll ever get the full story from Benny. I had hoped that we would get a debrief after the final plea where he would say, yeah, this is what happened, this is what happened.
I'd like to know who was with him.
But as you know, that never happens.
Yeah.
You know, unfortunately, that never ends up happening the way we'd like it to.
Did he ever try to blame it on Henry Lucas?
No, he didn't know anything about Henry Lucas.
That's good.
Well, that's good.
That's good.
I remember we asked that questions if he knew Lucas or Toole, and he didn't know who those people were. Never heard of them.
Shame. You could have bought it back off on him.
Oh man, well I'm glad he didn't know. You know. Oh yeah, I was there with Henry and Otis. We did that, and Frank and Becky.
Yeah, and two kids.
Now he claimed that there were two brothers with him with a Hispanic surname, and that wasn't Henry or Otis.
That's so good. That's so good. Now, and I mean, there are the school records and work records for Henry and Otis.
They put them all in Jacksonville, Florida.
Jacksonville. Yeah. Same with Orange Sox. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, what do you do when your client gets on the stand and goes, "No, those are forgeries. I wasn't there. I don't know how that signature got on that check. No, I did it." Henry got on the stand.
You know, like we talked about earlier, I think we've all learned to do a better job in law enforcement. It used to be, like you said, I've read the written confessions, and you know, a one-page statement that says, "Yeah, I did it," is not nearly as compelling as a 2-hour, 3-hour interview that it walks that person step by step, and you see their confession go from a total denial to a acceptance of their culpability.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we have now.
Yeah. And that's totally different, too, from a total acceptance with all wrong facts.
Right.
In a guessing game until you finally get the facts right.
Right.
Which is what was happening so many times with Henry Lucas. You know, no, guess again, Henry. Well, where you got a guy who They just, with the right interview techniques, bring him around to where he admitted it. Didn't have to show him, well, it was this car, wasn't it? It was this girl, wasn't it? That kind of stuff. But you had his DNA.
Yeah, we were very fortunate to have the DNA. I think without the DNA, we don't have a case.
I agree.
We would have never developed him as a suspect. This guy stayed out of trouble for all of those years. He certainly wasn't telling anybody about it.
All I can say is praise the Lord. Yeah. And I appreciate the hell out of you, Michael. Thank you for doing this. And I know you're going to do like all the other good guys and say, oh, I was just doing my job. But some people do their job really well and others don't. And you did yours really well. And I totally appreciate that. And I'm going to want to get back with you to talk about Ed Graff.
Sure.
Because you actually did that trial.
I did. We tried that case.
Yeah.
A couple of weeks.
Yeah. And I tried it the first time before it was reversed and it shouldn't have been. But
I cleaned that up for you.
You cleaned it up for me. He's always going around cleaning up my messes.
Yeah, really. That's actually totally true. Got a second generation cleanup crew.
Truthfully, we were doing our jobs. It's a job that any prosecutor that I've ever worked with takes very seriously. As a prosecutor, you take an oath to not get a conviction, but to see that justice is done. I always took that very seriously.
Yeah.
Every day, that was my only goal.
Me too.
I hope that's every prosecutor's goal to this day.
Me too. Every prosecutor and every policeman. Yeah. And I want the policeman to understand that the prosecutor is not the policeman's lawyer. The prosecutor is a lawyer for the people. You're the buffer between the police and the people. It's the prosecutor's job to see justice is done. Now, I think I would be a lot better after everything I've learned going through all this Lucas stuff at law enforcement, although I'm never going to do it. It's hard work. Prosecution is hard work. I don't think I would ever go back to it.
Prosecution is hard work.
It's one of the hardest jobs.
It's a thankless job, Vic.
It really is. And I would never do it again, but if I did, because of everything I've learned, and a lot of it from Henry Lucas's case, I'd be better at it.
I think in law enforcement, whether it's police or prosecutors, if your end goal is to find the truth, you can't go wrong.
I totally agree.
If you're looking to get your name in the newspaper, or if you're looking to have a Netflix special, or if you're looking to make a name for yourself, you're going to make mistakes. If you just look for the truth and do the right thing, that other stuff happens.
Yeah.
But the right thing, you can never argue against doing the right thing. I've prosecuted people for capital murder and put them on death row. I've also taken a capital murder case where I think the guy probably was good for it, but the evidence, there was a problem, and made the real hard decision to sign a dismissal. But if that's the right thing to do, and the evidence isn't there beyond a reasonable doubt, I've always been under my little rule of thumb, Vic, is I never tried a case to test the evidence from a jury. I don't believe the courtroom's a testing place. I believe unless I know that person is not only probably guilty, but unless I believe in my heart that person is guilty beyond any doubt, that I have a responsibility as a prosecutor to not go into that courtroom.
I agree.
I think the stakes are too high when somebody's individual liberty, or in the case of a death penalty, their life is on the line, that it shouldn't be a place to test the evidence. It shouldn't be a place to say, I think we've got enough. It should be a place to tell the jury, I know we have enough because this is the right verdict, because it's the truth.
God, I so agree. That is good. That is good. There are over 300 murder cases that were cleared with Henry Lucas confessions. Somewhere around 30 have been actually solved now with DNA comparison. Mm-hmm. Rita and Frank being two of them. And now we know who Orange Socks was. We have an identity of her because of DNA. And because what you're saying about seeking the truth. Would you agree with me? I think you would. I don't even need to ask this. that any agency out there that's got a Henry Lee Lucas case that's been closed, cleared because of a Lucas confession, it should get another look.
I think it's definitely worth a separate look, if not for just the pure sanctity of the truth, but for those families that I've sat across from in 2 different living rooms and in courtrooms to get the right verdict on the right person, and for them to have true closure.
Amen.
I think it's worth that.
And at least go look through the closed file room and see if there are any seal meal bags with a pair of panties in them, from 40 years ago or 30 years ago or wherever, and submit them if they haven't been, because things fall through the cracks sometimes.
What's the harm?
What's the harm? Exactly. Because if what we're after is the truth, what's the harm?
It's one test, and it may answer a question, and it may not, but at least it's something you can check off the list to say, we took a second look. The prosecutors that get in trouble are the ones that say, no, I don't want to look. I don't want to keep an open mind. And I think when we close our minds to another possibility is when we end up getting tunnel vision, and that's what causes problems.
I'm drafting a letter right now to a sheriff up in Missouri. There was an article in the newspaper last week that the state police, the sheriff's office, and the FBI was at a farm in Missouri digging it up, looking for the body of a missing 19-year-old girl who was kidnapped and murdered back in the, late 70s?
Yeah, it was a 70s murder.
70s. And Henry had confessed to it and said, yeah, I think I buried her on that farm over there. Mm-hmm. She had a coworker drive by. It was a broad daylight kidnapping from the store. She was missing. The money out of the bank bag was missing, but the bank bag was on the floor. Years later, they get DNA off that bank bag. And the sheriff in this newspaper thing says, well, I still think Henry Lucas did this crime, even though we didn't find a body. Unfortunately, we don't have any DNA to compare the bank bag to. Mm-hmm. So I'm writing him and saying, yeah, you do. You think it's Henry, so compare it to Henry's DNA, and at least then you know it's not him.
Either way. That's kind of what Michael Morton taught all of us, right?
Amen.
That what's the harm? I guess I'll stick with that.
Yeah.
In Michael's case, there was a bandana that was left at the crime scene, and
I want to have Michael Morton on this show sometime. I've already reached out to him.
Be great.
Yeah.
He's got an incredible story to tell.
He really does. And some of the same people were involved in his case that were involved in Henry Lucas and Orange Socks. Yeah. Well, I know you've got work to get to. Is there anything I've forgotten to ask on this?
No, Vic, I applaud you for continuing your quest for the truth. I think it's an important thing that we all need to be aware of. It's not about, again, I'll say it again, it's not about a conviction. It's not about a jail sentence or a prison term. It's about making sure we do the right thing all the time.
Amen. Folks, we've been listening to Michael Jarrett. He's a phenomenal lawyer. Thank you for talking with us today, Michael.
Thank you for inviting me.
And I'm looking forward to having you back to talk about Ed Graff.
Let's do it.
Thank you for listening to the Vic Feazell Show podcast. And visit us at www.vicfeazell.com for more information. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.
Drive laid back and lower your speed, 1877 with Vic.